Welcome to The Real Market with Chris Rising, the only podcast that brings the real estate conference panel to your headphones. You'll hear from superstars from every realm of commercial real estate, the biggest brokers, the most well-known architects, the largest investors, and the most visionary developers. We'll learn what they do, how they do it, and what drives their success. We'll discuss the latest trends across regional markets, capital flows, both national and global, and we'll explore technology's role in shaping all of them. We'll take a clear-eyed look at where we've been, where we are now, and what's to come. Real conversations, real experts, real insights. This is The Real Market. Welcome to The Real Market with Chris Rising. I'm really excited to have Aaron Curry with me today. If anybody has been watching football over the last year, I guess it'd be 2 years now, but especially last year with the Los Angeles Rams winning the Super Bowl, you're going to know the project that Aaron works on. And Aaron is in the real estate development group within Meany. Is doing a lot around the retail development. I have to imagine that Stan Kroenke, Aaron, looks at you and goes, all right, I know I can fill this place 8 or 10 nights a year. Aaron, how are you going to fill it the rest? That's got to be part of your discussions over there, I bet.
Yeah, it's certainly an exciting topic for us to talk about. I think they've done a pretty good job so far. It doesn't hurt to have a hometown team win the Super Bowl. I think that's a nice kickoff for us. But yeah, we absolutely are excited about everything beyond just the events that are happening within SoFi Stadium. There's a lot to be discovered about this project, and we're excited at how it's coming online.
Well, I remember being in law school and, one of the great date nights was going to Hollywood Park with like $1 beer and watching some ponies run. The land's a little bit different now. And outside of the Ram games and a few concerts, the real intention is that this project become a focal point for Los Angeles. It's obviously right near to the Great Western Forum and near where Mr. Ballmer is going to be building a basketball stadium. But the driver is what Meany is doing in the development. So why don't you talk a little bit about what SoFi Stadium is, but really the broader development and what you're creating there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you've got a great perspective having seen it and remembering the racetrack fairly well and the casino itself, because I do believe that there's some nice homages to what's been here, and that being Hollywood Park Racetrack within the current development. But yeah, the SoFi Stadium grabs a ton of the attention, and rightfully so. This is an incredible venue that I'm actually sitting in right now. It's so multi-purpose, and it's truly state of the art. And I just think it's architecturally one of the best places to be. I'm very biased. I work for Meany, and particularly on the retail. I think retail is the heart and soul of the entire space. It's open 365. The way we're activating it with different businesses, but also entertainment uses, I think is something that's going to be really exciting for the community. And then, the non-LA dwellers that come in for, maybe it's an event or in town on just sort of vacation, will have a lot to see in a close proximity to the airport. But to put the scale of the entire development into perspective, I mean, it's 300 acres. And I don't think that's something you could even sort of picture when it was Hollywood Park Racetrack, because they had the stables that expanded east back toward Darby Park, but effectively we run from Pinkay, which is just south of the Forum, all the way down to Century Boulevard. And if you added it all up, Disneyland would fit solidly within the confines, or solidly within the borders of the Hollywood Park development. Office space is at a premium in Los Angeles right now, and we've got some incredible office buildings that just went up and opened. Actually, the NFL media is in the building just behind me, in about 250,000 square feet, and the entire building's 450,000 square feet of Class A office space that we're really excited to have online. And then we've got a hotel in the works that would be located within the site, and then our first phase of residential is going up right now as well, and should be open relatively soon. So all of that tied together, but by what I think is truly an iconic retail development, and one that I think will be really, really powerful, is going to sort of create the community that is Hollywood Park. But really at a base, if I had to be totally unbiased and say, what's the real anchor of this project? Honestly, I think it's the landscaping and the outdoor space. If you haven't seen the lake on any of the TV shots, it's magnificent. It's incredible to see in person, but definitely shows well on TV too.
Let me ask you about the lake, because I was fortunate to go to a few games this year, and the first thing someone says if they hadn't been to Hollywood Park and all is, why is there a lake? Is the lake the actual lake, a replica of what was at Hollywood Park? What was the idea in a place that has a pretty big drought going? But what was the idea of having a lake there?
Yeah, it was certainly an homage, one, to the old lake that was inside of the racetrack, on the inside of the grounds on the racetrack. So there used to be like a center point for the community was the infield of Hollywood Park racetrack, and had a small water feature. This one's a little bit larger in scale, but wanted a prominent water feature for the community to have access to 365. So that was sort of the design influence for the lake. And then we were able to kind of bring in our amazing landscape architect and tie in some sustainability experts, but it does have, a significant amount of eco-positive benefits that help the entire site maintain, water levels. But it doesn't rain too much here, but it does capture a lot of the rainfall when it does.
Yeah. Well, I having been there a few times and watching it go up, and one of my dear friends is Todd Doney, who I've had on my podcast, who does the office leasing. He over and over again says the success of the project is not because there's one piece to this puzzle. It's not just because of the stadium. It's not just because they'll have some residential or some office. It's the way it all works together on those 300 acres. But to get someone who isn't going to be living within those 300 acres to come outside of a Ram game or a concert, you've got to have a there. You've got to have a place. So can you talk a little bit about the placemaking that you all are doing with the retail and what the vision is for it over the next 5 years?
It's one that we wanted to focus on. One, we started small. So we started to zoom in, and we're like, how do we create the best of Los Angeles? How do we tie in the best of Inglewood and zoom out from there? So a lot of our literally from our design of spaces to some of our tenant outreach, we wanted to start local first. The first deal we signed was with a woman named Lynn Weaver, who, if you don't know her, you may know her brewery, and that's Three Weavers Brewery. She's in Inglewood. It's a brand that was started here, and she couldn't be more excited to have a second location in Inglewood. And that's, when people are assuming we're signing chain sports bar type restaurants, for us to be able to have a first deal with an operator like her was really exciting and attractive to us as far as deal making goes and place making. And I personally take it as a compliment anytime we start announcing tenants or we introduce future operators into the project, and people are surprised to hear that so and so's coming.
Aaron, I'm really glad that you started there, because I think the mayor of Inglewood will go down as probably the most legendary mayor that Inglewood has ever seen. He has brought more business, more jobs, but the concern has always been, would it drive out local businesses? I can tell you, and I'm a little bit older than you, but I was lucky enough at one point to represent Faithful Central Baptist Church when it owned the Forum. And one of the big things that the pastor wanted to do there was make sure that local businesses thrived. And, the world changed and all of that. I think the biggest criticism that I heard about this project was this fear that there was going to be this amazing amount of gentrification that would drive out local businesses. And that you all started with a local business is, I think, to your credit. I also think that what I've seen is it's also birthed businesses within Inglewood, because now there's a reason to come beyond concerts as you build out residential and all of that. But at the same time, you're a real estate developer. We need credit. We all need credit when we do this. So how do you balance the local, giving the opportunity to local businesses, with the credit tenants that are going to bring tourists from around the world?
Something that we've always sort of worked at. And I think, our approach of starting local was not even just for like a headline or to feel good about ourselves or pat ourselves in the back. We genuinely felt like this wasn't going to be a viable retail project if we didn't include the community, tie in some existing businesses that you may typically see excluded or just not included from a lot of the development on this scale. We've been able to kind of curate and work with the operators, just to kind of lay out what's physically going to be there. And in some cases, walk through the steps of going into, a brand new construction project. These aren't second gen spaces. This isn't, have already existing kitchens, or you can just sort of take over. So there's definitely been sort of a coordination process with a lot of the businesses as we walk through this. And then we've been able to kind of go back to more national operators, ones that can appreciate the significance of where this development is physically in Inglewood, what's going on around it, having, SoFi Stadium and YouTube Theater, just a few steps away, and having this lake and seeing sort of what's coming online over the next few years. And can also appreciate that the tenant mix is not your typical tenant mix for a project of this type. I think the assumption that we always run into on this project is that we're building retail to service just the stadium events, and it couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, if you look back on sort of how this development came together, Wilson Meany's involvement started in like 2004. Before there was ever even an idea of a stadium here anyway. So I laugh when they say what's going to happen on a non-game day, because this entire thing was planned for sort of a non-game day. I do think we've tied it together really nicely with SoFi Stadium, and I'm happy to have this as a feature that we can sort of advertise or utilize for our businesses coming in. But yeah, this is absolutely, retail should be a destination in and of itself.
So I don't know if a lot of the listeners or watchers, we don't have a map in front of us, may not know the history of how this site all came together. But having been around it, obviously we had the Forum, and when the Lakers moved to Staples, Faithful Central bought it, and then it sold, and it went to Madison Square and they made it into a music venue. At the same time, Walmart was going to build a Walmart, and the community came out in droves saying, we don't want a Walmart in our community. And at the same time, Stockbridge bought Hollywood Park, and Wilson Meany was brought in to redevelop along with Stockbridge. Fortunately, or unfortunately, but fortunately, I think, Stan Kroenke knew somebody over Walmart. I don't know how that happened. And said, hey, if you can't build a store, maybe I build a stadium. So this all starts to come together. It was a little bit happenstance, and then a lot of really quality real estate thinking on behalf of Wilson Meany and Stockbridge, and Kroenke has some pretty good real estate chops as well. But it's still pretty hard to get away from the fact when I took this to a prominent mall developer in 2002 or so, he brought out a map and said, Chris, look at these zip codes. Half of your potential shoppers are fish. This is if you put these circles here and then you look at the zip codes, it's still a challenge to make something work when because in retail, it's all the circles, right? You want people to come from all directions, and this is close to the water. So how do you think about providing a destination? Because this is what it really is for a lot of people. How do you think about, okay, we want people to come, not to do their grocery shopping for an hour, not to come to a mall for 2 hours. We want people to spend a lot of time here. How do you do that? What's the concepts around the food and the movie theaters, and how do you put that all together?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've been fortunate to have, again, starting with sort of the early businesses that we've signed, like a Three Weavers or Sky's Tacos, these sort of iconic operators that only have like 1 or 2 locations. So their brands already are pulling you out of whatever zip code you're in, just by the fact that they don't have the volume that a chain restaurant might have. And then we're tying it in. We were fortunate enough to sign a movie theater lease with Sinopolis, which is to us an incredible operator, but they're not coming in just rolling out store number or theater number 555. They're treating this like it's their US flagship, given the sort of visibility of the site, the proximity, and all those sort of entertainment features that we've been discussing already. They're approaching this like it's their, it's going to be one of their best theaters in the United States. And we're excited about that. We love to hear that from larger operators, that this site is a little bit different than other locations. So we've kind of been able to leverage those brands, and then, but not to harp too much on the outdoor space. I really think, like I personally, I got my driving lessons and practice with my dad in the Forum parking lot. And I think that's such an amazing place to sort of just see how the community uses what's really just effectively just asphalt surrounding the Forum, right? And you see like the RC car meetups and the little races that happen in the parking lot. I do think the community is really going to engage with the outdoor space, still using the Forum and still using Darby Parks and those that exist. But I do think once the site is a little bit further along and it starts to be like, oh yeah, you can walk by the lake and have walk your dog and walk your pet, and then go grab, an Antojitos Martins smoothie or an elote in the retail afterward. Or I do think the outdoor space is going to serve as a nice draw, especially coming out of what we've just been in for the last little while here. We were excited to be able to kind of offer a few different experiences within the site.
Well, I think something that's lost on people is they don't quite understand that you all did construction right through COVID. The stadium itself was ready during the middle of COVID, but the stadium is just kind of phase one. That first office building is maybe phase 1A, and there is a lot left to do there. What is the timeline, do you think, before the entire 300 acres is built out? Is it a generation? Is it 20 years? Is it 5 years? How do you, I know I'm asking you to predict the future as interest rates are going up, but what do you see?
No, I think that it's coming along. What I would imagine is probably, I would say, to give just the vaguest answer, quicker than we think. And I know that's sort of, there's no real timing on it. I do know that some of the things that we're excited about on the site, but even just citywide, or at least aware of, like the Olympics in 2028. And that to me is sort of my backstop and working backwards. So a lot of the infrastructure, outside of just what we're doing on the project, but around the city, I think a lot of people are factoring in 2028 as sort of like the short-term timeline as far as some development goes. I think we'll have a good amount. I think this is, over, a decade, we'll still be building things, would be my guess, though.
How do you look at providing a retail experience to people as cranes are in the air? And because we all know that construction clogs up streets and makes neighbors unhappy. What is it that Wilson Meany is doing to try to ease that, and also to try to make it more efficient so people do say, hey, it's worth coming on a Saturday morning when it's not football season to go visit the site?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think part of that is sort of what we're doing now. I mean, my day to day, I'm out on our retail construction site probably 4.5, 5 days a week, doing tours. So, a lot of it, we're trying to drive sales, we're trying to drive leasing, absolutely. But effectively, I'll meet with anybody that wants to see it. I think there's sort of a helpful sort of walkthrough process that can be beneficial just as far as seeing access. This is where you would theoretically enter. This is our retail parking structure, and that's stadium parking over there, or what have you. I do think there's a little bit of we've been doing that consistently over the last 2 years and since we started construction on the retail itself. But then I also think just getting people to the site for different features. I think it's helped the way that we phased the project. So having the stadium open, unfortunately, it was in the heart of COVID with no fans. But being able to get to the stadium and then get to YouTube Theater and then get to the office building. And it's not like we're pulling the curtains off of everything at once and saying, good luck and find your way around. We're able to sort of phase the community in and phase, tourists in. And that's sort of how we're trying to attack the familiarity. Because when you do think a lot of these large scale venues in Los Angeles, quite honestly, have been around for effectively our entire lives, right? The Dodger stadiums of the world and the LA Coliseums and the Rose Bowls and those sorts of things. So there's at least an amount of familiarity with how you access those spaces. I think for SoFi Stadium, there's a learning curve just as far as, I'm a shortcuts kind of guy. So just getting your shortcuts down to the stadium or finding your preferred parking space. So I think we're going through that now, but I think it's really been positive. And for retail itself, I mean, we've got signalized entrances sort of on the south side of the project that are almost exclusively retail once it opens up. And we've got our own garage and parking mechanisms that we're excited about. So yeah, we should ideally be able to coexist on an event day or a non-event day relatively easily.
I have a lot of friends on hashtag RETwit, which is the real estate Twitter group, who are Texans. And I was just in Texas, and they love to talk about Jerry's World, and they love to talk about all that there. I've tried to explain to them that, look, guys, you're talking about one football stadium and one baseball stadium. Your basketball stadium isn't even that close to it. I think it's less than half or more than half the size of the SoFi project that you all are doing. I mean, this is a much more complicated deal. And by the way, last I checked, it's a little bit harder to get things done in California than it is Texas. But we have to all admit that Jerry's World is the inspiration, I think, for Kroenke and everybody else. What do you think is going to differentiate this project from some of the other NFL stadiums that are really just single purpose, fill it with some concerts, but it's really for football games or baseball games? What do you think people will walk away from this experience that is markedly different?
Yeah, I think, with all respect to Texas, to all of Texas, I think we sort of I think the market sort of shapes a lot of the character of the building that we're sitting in. And a credit to Mr. Kroenke and his vision and on how he wanted to actually craft the entire site, but certainly the stadium. Like, first of all, physically, you've seen it. Like, we're over 100 yards into the Earth's surface. We had to stay out of the flight path of LAX. So the mass of the building is actually below street level. But and then there's also two teams that play here. So it's not too much skewed one way or the other as far as, physical branding on the side. There's a lot of digital signage that's flexible. But I think that helps make this venue kind of the premier destination in a market that might be the premier destination for sports and entertainment. There are certain tours that just hit, the LA, New York, and maybe like one or two other cities, or there's certain events that'll only look at an LA or a coastal market. And I bring up we had a BTS show here, I guess it was a few months ago. And you're familiar with the BTS group, and I didn't know what I was getting into. I got tied into a meeting with a potential sponsorship group, and we did a retail tour ahead of the concert. And I mean, when I tell you there were fans lined up like from 7 a.m. beating our construction workers here every day, it was consistent 4 days. And those are shows that you can't necessarily replicate in a ton of other venues. They might not do like a 50 city US tour or 40 city US tour, but the events that are happening, and I know that there's some exciting ones in the works now too. The events that happen within the footprint of the stadium, I think will truly kind of shape the character of it because they'll be so iconic.
Aaron, my father used to always say, "Hey, Chris," and my father was a developer. He'd say, "Hey, Chris, if I have three people waiting to have a meeting with me, and one's my lawyer, wants to tell me about the legal stuff, one's my banker, wants to tell me about the finance, and the other's my broker, wants to tell me about a tenant, I meet with my broker first." So I have to imagine Mr. Kroenke and the senior leadership at Wilson Meany are watching very closely what you're doing on the retail, because that's going to drive the project. So it's a pretty darn big job. Why don't you tell us a little bit about, I know that you grew up in Los Angeles and went to Campbell Hall. I think you're a Wildcat, went to U of A. But how did you get interested? What in your life experience got you interested in being in real estate and being a part of and wanting to be a part of such a high profile project?
Yeah, definitely. Real estate wise, I sort of figured out, in my time in Arizona toward the end, I didn't necessarily know which way I wanted to go profession wise, but I think I got my first love of real estate. My dad used to buy, and my dad also grew up in Inglewood particularly, but used to buy and flip houses. So I would go with him when I was 9-10 years old and watch him he used to buy like absolute junkers. And I didn't necessarily realize that it was his business or anything. I would just see the house transform from like just dilapidated to like a really, really nice house, or a pretty nice house. I don't want to give him too much credit, but I started to see the transformation is what sort of attracted me to real estate. And I knew that I didn't want to do residential. All respect to it, I just felt like that was not my calling. But I did sort of have this desire to be a part of real estate. And I didn't realize that I think that was what sort of made me want to be a part of development in particular, was to be able to see the sort of transformation, but also to have input, to be able to tie in various, be it community desires or, you think what will ultimately be needs in the future. I think development's very interesting just from the fact that you're taking some of the history, you're taking some of the past, you're trying to project for the future, but in the same time, you're creating something that's should hopefully work almost immediately, be it housing, be it retail, be it office space. You want to actually have some quick successes, but it's a long, arduous process. And so I've always liked the interim, the process while we're in construction. I've always enjoyed, pitching tenant meetings or being a part of meetings where it's like, we're talking about what ultimately, looking back on it, will seem like a small hurdle, or it might seem like a mundane detail once the project actually opens. But like knowing the battles that were had just to get, you know, that landscaping right there, or just to get that building height right there, I think is what's exciting to me. So I definitely credit my dad in helping me to see the you know, the beginning phases of real estate, albeit from a residential perspective.
Well, you get out of college, and you know there's no entry point necessarily for undergrad into real estate. There is if you go to business school, and so you have this desire. You think, hey, maybe I want to be in real estate. What was your first move to get into real estate?
Yeah, so I started working at Keller Williams, which is primarily a residential agency, have a decent sized commercial arm, but I ended up working for one of the franchise owner operators that was tasked with opening a new office, and in particular, he was opening that office in Inglewood. So it was sort of like a special projects role. It was a little bit my first taste in commercials, as far as, you know, I did some tenant rep jobs on the side, just really tried to, you know, grassroots it and kind of teach myself a little bit. But also one of my first projects was literally finding a space for this franchise to open. And then as far as, you know, building up community support, helping to find agents and those sorts of things, all of that was sort of entitled. But I knew I loved Inglewood, and I knew I sort of had this sort of home feeling because, you know, my grandmother's lived here since well before I was born. And again, I learned to drive in the Forum parking lot. It's always sort of felt like home to me here. So I knew I wanted to be a part of that project. And as we grew, I had the opportunity to go over Marcus and Millichat from Keller Williams. It was a little bit, I was at their headquarters, so it was more focused on overall, more on the national side and agent services and those sorts of things. And then got connected.
They teach you how to cold call there, though. At Marcus and Millichat, you learn how to cold call there. If you want me to dial a phone right now, I can still whip it up pretty quickly. But yeah, absolutely. You're on the phone, and I think, yeah, that's great. It was great for me to learn, and just as far as, you know, communicating too. And you know, one of the nice things about Marcus Millichat, because they've got such a global and national presence, you're communicating with people not just in the LA market. You're talking to people across the country, New York, you know, Southern Florida or Midwest, you know. So I did get very, very comfortable on the phone, to your point. And then through a friend, a connection actually through Campbell Hall, and the broker, Michael Townsend, who's sort of a legend, was able to connect with Will Heidel here on our team, who brought me on and introduced me to Chris Meany, and the rest is history. But I knew, you know, I wanted to be a part of this project in whatever capacity. And then when I heard the pitch that we're approaching this with a way, you know, we weren't just trying to fill it up with major chain restaurants and these large brands that I think are, yeah, sometimes expected by a retail development near a stadium. When I heard the approach that Wilson Meany was taking, and I got to know a little bit more about the Ferry building, I was all in from the pitch. Well, they certainly have Wilson Meany has a great track record. I've known principals over there for many years, and great respect. I mean, I'd just like to talk, though, a little bit about there are some exceptionally successful African-American developers, and I'm fortunate to call some friends, Victor McFarland, Donahue Peebles. I still think Donahue Peebles is one of the great developers out there, regardless of the color of his skin. But I was just at a YPO real estate, industrial real estate event, and this one of the keynote speakers was Eric Dickerson and Chris Hale, who are friends of mine as well. And Chris was very quick to point out that the whole room was white, and it's just a reality, and it's not a good reality, and it's not a reality everywhere. But if everyone's going to be honest, for whatever reason, it's a white male dominated business, and we could, I'm sure, have a beer and come up with a lot of reasons, but that doesn't change the fact it's a reality that you deal with. Can you talk to I would say a fairly Gen Z millennial audience of all different backgrounds. Can you talk about some of the challenges you faced and maybe some of the opportunities you had to create for yourself? And, you know, I'm not trying to make a soap opera, but I think we got to be real and say, you've chosen a career path that is more white than it should be.
Yeah, no, I think it's a totally fair point. And I think even when I was first jumping in, and I just jumped all in, I didn't really have, you know, I would say traditional training real estate wise, but I knew it's sort of where I wanted to be. But, you know, you look around and it's to your point about being predominantly white, but also it's relatively like a higher age threshold, right? So you come in at, I guess I was 23 when I was getting started, 24. And even then, you're still trying to get your footing. And they always tell you, don't expect to make money within the first year of starting. And I was like, okay, cool. I've got that. I think I can battle through that. But then you start to see how much of a relationship business it is. And I went to, my first ICSC a few years ago here. And I was like, it's a bunch of people that have known each other in a good way. They've known each other for a long time, but it's so relationship driven that it's like, if you're, a 23-year-old young Black man from LA and you're trying to, foster relationships with these institutional landlords or these people with over, 3 million square feet of real estate in their portfolio or what have you, I feel like it can be tough to break in. It's a lot of real estate operators are successful. Most people have money and they've had success doing things one way and for one way only. And there's not a lot of, sometimes there's not a lot of, I guess I wouldn't call it desire to change, but I guess there's not always, incentive to break from how you've been doing your business for the last few years. So I feel like my personal start was to try and reach out to small, predominantly minority business owners and see if I could help them on the tenant rep side. Like if it's going to be tough to get a relationship with these institutional operators or these corporate operators, like at least start to help and build a business that you can, build your book of business with emerging brands that can kind of recognize that you're just starting out too. So yeah, I reached out to some restaurants, clothing operator or apparel operators, and was just seeing if they were thinking about expanding. I did a few tenant rep deals and tried to get the ball rolling on the ground level from there. But yeah, it's definitely something that should be addressed as far as maintaining these relationships with these big accounts, right? The ones that are going to get you large commissions on the brokerage side, or these landlords or developers that are going to be doing large scale developments fairly consistently. I think it's tough to kind of create that relationship out of thin air.
Yeah, I think you hit on a lot of the realities of the business that I do try to explain to people that, deals I'm doing today have been 20 years in the works. I mean, Absolutely. They're not, whether it's the equity source that took me 20 years to have them to have confidence in me. And I think one of the realities too in this business is you hit it. You have to, if you're going to go the brokerage side. Now, I went to law school, then I went to the brokerage side. So going to commission after getting a salary was a really tough thing. But it's a real issue. You come out of school, people have student debt, and all of a sudden you're told, hey, you gotta go work for free for a year or two. So I think those are real issues. I do think on the converse of it all is the reality is the whole world is changing, has changed immensely. And there are decision makers who are women, people of color. And I'll tell you, I've said this on my podcast before, one of my biggest lease deals I ever did, I walked in, the way I was trained was with a dark suit, white shirt, tie. And this young woman who was in 6,000 feet going to 60 said, get out of here. And I'm like, what do you mean? We have a meeting. She said, I don't meet with white guys in suits. I'm afraid. So the next day I showed up. At that point, I was only a broker, and I showed up in jeans and stuff like that. But she told me something that it's always stuck with me, which is, I'm going to be your tenant, which means I'm going to be your client. I need people who look like me, talk like me, So I think there's a chance. I think there's a very solid chance as the generations go, we're going to see it. But it doesn't take away from the fact that there's challenges there, but you ain't going to get anywhere if you don't work hard. And I know that you and your team are working your tail off on this project.
Absolutely.
Part of it is because we went through COVID. Part of it is these things are difficult. What kind of lessons did you learn breaking into the business that you think are important to where you are now?
Yeah, great question. I think, obviously persistence, very cliche answer, but you have to, I've seen deals on this project alone where we talked in 2018 and kind of things died down or went away for whatever reason. And, we're executing leases with them, next week, those sorts of things. And so nothing's ever really dead is one of the sort of lessons I think I've learned. And again, speaking to the earlier point about just sort of relationships, I do think you always want to be able to pick up the phone and call somebody, whether a deal goes left, sideways, or doesn't perform as you thought it would. I definitely think it's important that you maintain those sort of relationship levels. And then just on this development, I think I've learned that there's no, one of the biggest lessons I've learned, and I credit, Wilson Meany and ownership group, Hollywood Park Management Company a lot, is that I think when I first started on this project, I went into a meeting. We had just brought on brokers. We had a meeting with our landscape architects and we had our design architects. It was very much sort of like a mind share, get everybody familiar with the layout and just talk about how we're going to pitch and how we're going to present this project together. And I was very much like the new guy on the project. So I might have said like 4 words in this entire meeting. And we were sitting there. And at one point, and these plans have been in motion for over a decade at this point. And we're sitting there and one of our brokers casually just brings up like, how about we just move this building from here all the way over here and reposition these 3 buildings? And I got ready to I thought the whole meeting was about to go off the rails. I got ready to duck under the table. And then ultimately, everyone at the table, and the credit to them again, is we're like, okay, let's talk this through. How does this make a better project? Is this going to help us achieve what we're ultimately trying to do? And we sat there and sort of moved this building around and redesigned, these plans that had been in the motion for a long time. I think they may have even been submitted for plot plan at that point. And we sort of undid a lot of the work, but if we felt like we can make this project a little bit better, ownership was absolutely willing to do that. So I kind of learned that there's no sense in being rigid or married to an idea just because you've had it for so long or you've been committed to it for X amount of time. Anything should be pivotable in one way or another. And we were able to kind of talk it through there. But that was sort of an eye opener for me. It's like, oh, this massive development, this worship of the development, like no way they'll actually change a building that's, been in the works. So that's probably something that I want to take with me for a long time. Is that you've got to be adaptable.
That's a great story. Let me ask you this. If you were talking to a young person who's asking you for advice and they said, Aaron, what's the difference between being a broker, what you were doing, and then what you're doing now as a developer? How would you explain that to somebody who is interested in the business?
Yeah, it's on this project, there's a lot of the same. So there's nothing that's you're going to learn as a broker that's going to necessarily hurt, in my opinion, hurt you development wise. I think it's all additive. Development is very much, you sort of have to center your focus. Me particularly, I work on Hollywood Park retail, and we've got people in our office that are on several other projects, but you really do have to be committed. Not to say that brokers aren't, but you have to lock in on one physical piece of either real estate, land, or project, however you break it down. I do think you have to be able to sort of lock in and live it, breathe it, get out, walk it. But I think you've got this sort of obligation to get to know the neighborhood or get to know the area you're developing. So a lot of this project for me, and I obviously grew up here, but even when getting, first onboarding here is driving around and meeting anybody that was willing to meet and starting to get to know people. I don't think you can be a successful developer without sort of getting an understanding of the community needs, what you're trying to create, being transparent with what you're trying to create, but also including people as you create it. So it's very much, you have to get your boots on the ground. Brokerage, I think you can sort of look at brands and you can do it from a little more remotely. I think you probably want to be boots on the ground there anyways, but development absolutely have to get to know the area, and you have to get to obviously know ties in politics, and you've got to know the sort of zoning timings and all those sorts of things, or permit timings, excuse me. So all of that ties in, but getting to know the area is huge, and being present in the area, I think is very important.
What would you say was a challenge moving over from brokerage to real estate development? It's a little bit of a loaded question I'm about to ask you, but what did you think, okay, you had to be prepared for? Because I know on our side of the business, because I'm a developer too, the financial analysis is a different look than it is when you're a broker. Broker, you got one tenant, you're worried about the economics for that one tenant. On your side, it's not just the economics of that deal, it's how the economics of that deal is going to affect all the other deals within your project. So was that a tough transition for you? Were you ready for that?
It was, yes, definitely tough. I think for how we approached it on this project, and there's not a ton to compare this project to, so I absolutely have been learning it in real time since I've started. But the way, we sort of break it down, certainly with the financial component, by like project, right? Project yield and like office has one and retail has one and hotel pad will have, and we'll try and tie them together and present them. So nothing we do doesn't affect any other portion, but yeah, zooming in on the retail itself, you do sort of have to manage the overall. And so, we might have a potential tenant that would be really great at X economics, but and we could do the deal. And I think the brokers would want to push a deal, but we just know, like, on the development side, we know we're going to have to make up that dollar amount somewhere else, or we know, we're thinking about the next deal rather than just singularly that one. So that was a little bit of a learning curve or an adjustment. But holistically, I think, we've got a good amount of flexibility in how we set up economic deal terms for tenants. And we just try and do our best coordinating that.
So I guess I really have to also ask you, so the deals that you were looking at doing pre-COVID, whether it's the credit of the tenant or the structure of the deal, percentage rent, lease, fully paid lease, did it change in post-COVID world when you guys were shut down for so long? Did you have to get more aggressive, or did you choose to get more aggressive, or, how did that look?
Yeah, that's so there's a few different. The short answer is yes, we certainly made some adjustments. Again, our biggest deal signed is a movie theater, and I don't know too many industries that were hit harder than the movie theater industry. We were luckily able to restabilize that deal, but we're in with an operator that we're excited with in Sinopolis, and Sinopolis was signed prior to COVID as well. But yeah, there's certainly a pivot economically. I think physically, the site is actually kind of designed for a post-COVID world. And again, credit to all the designers and consultants that were in on the project from day one, because again, we maximized outdoor space, patios at a premium on this project. And we have tons of different, restaurants that are sort of spread throughout that are small business or minority owned businesses that are, also tying into the consciousness, I think, that's come out of COVID as far as how people spend their dollars. And then, economics, it's one, COVID impacted it, but also we know that this is going to be a new project, and we're factoring in that we're going to need a little bit of runway for takeoff. Again, I mentioned, we talked about some of the other venues that have been around for so long, but this is going to be brand new. And I think there's going to be sort of a getting used to it for a lot of potential guests and consumers that are coming to the site. So we wanted to give these are the tenants that we signed and tenants that we will sign sort of a runway to kind of get stabilized and then ultimately get their feet under them. And then, we do have some, stabilization dates as far as how we, when we expect everything to be solidified.
So as we hit 2028, we'll have the airport connected via rail. There is a plan for a people mover in Inglewood. So I was trying to say, similar to some that we've seen in other cities. Yeah. What do you think the whole site's going to look like in 2028? Will this be a car dependent? Will people really be taking rail, public transportation? Will people be walking to the shops and doing kind of the game day experience that, like, I have when you go to New Orleans or Seattle? How do you think it's all going to look?
Yeah, I think my hope is that it's less car dependent, obviously environmentally, but also, we've got a lot of parking lots on the site now. And if you've been to the stadium, you've seen all the on-site parking is actually entitled for other phases of development. Now they will build garages and things to replace the spaces that are ultimately getting constructed on. But I do think there's going to be a lot of opportunity for walking. I really do. And then you factor in third-party rideshare and how accessible, different pieces of the site are by Uber. But once you're inside, I don't think you need a car, to be honest with you. I think, I say it a lot. I've done laps, again, from the retail to the stadium. And it's not a terrible walk, especially when you factor in some of the lake and the landscaping. And then ultimately, once we have businesses open, I fully expect it to be a highly walkable site once you're inside. Factoring in, we're working on some opportunities that would be make a little pedestrian access to the Clippers site relatively easy as well. And so we really feel like walking is going to be a big feature of this project, more so than you see, in other cities in Los Angeles or other neighborhoods in Los Angeles.
Well, to that point, how do you look at it in terms of this 300 acres, but there's a lot of Inglewood around it, a lot of single family homes that goes back to just after World War II
Of
that were
course.
built. How do you see that part of the Inglewood community blending in with the new 300 acres that are being redeveloped?
Yeah, we're excited about that, and the existing community. Honestly, this is a huge reason why we wanted to create this in the first place, and we wanted to create a retail development that we felt was elevated, but one that was emblematic and representative of what the community was looking for from retail experiences. And there's some, you look at any other neighborhood around Los Angeles, and you've got your sort of regional shopping centers or your sub-regional shopping centers that are, have different elements of food and beverage or movie theaters or what have you. And Inglewood's sort of underserved in that regard. Not that there's not incredible retailers here. There are. We've signed a few of them, but they're just great businesses around. But we also wanted to provide the infrastructure to have like the placemaking to tie that into the existing operators, and then have the infrastructure to bring in operators that were either not in the market already or couldn't figure out how to break in from a national perspective. And so we wanted to kind of create a place where we can merge. But effectively, I mean, my own personal goal is I want to provide, smaller businesses with a stage and a platform to capture a lot of the foot traffic, because there's so many, iconic little food spots or little apparel stores that don't get the benefit of having, high volume foot traffic because they're at, a smaller location that only, the neighborhood knows about, but they're supported in high amounts. So we wanted to create something. I mean, honestly, you worked with Faithful Central and understanding like the post-church brunch crowd is a real thing. It's a real thing. That's huge for us in the community. And I think that there's not enough of, you could never have too many restaurants. I think for especially an operator that was previously in the Forum, you can never have enough restaurants nearby. And I think we wanted to create some elevated opportunities for a brunch crowd, for a date night. I believe Sinopolis is going to be the only movie theater in Inglewood in the last for a long time, a lot of years. I know Miracle Theater has been recently renovated, but they're going to show first run movies. We're excited about having an elevated opportunity, be it lunch, brunch, or date night, what have you.
That's great. What do you? Well, we can wrap up here in a moment, but how do you look at how many nights or how many days a year the stadium will be used, and how will that affect your retail?
Yeah, and I don't know the exact numbers, but I think the estimates are about 60 or so event days in the building. And so for us, I think, majority of those majority of them will be concerts. And then ultimately the 20 or so football games between the Chargers and the Rams. And for us, I think there's a lot of opportunity to connect. And that's what some of our operators so far are excited about. Because of the flexibility of this venue, some of these creative business owners are already figuring out like, okay, we've got a residency art gallery, an art gallery that wants to do, I think when they get during Super Bowl, he's got this artist that's used a lot of sort of football inspiration. And then we've got, a couple like Antitos Martin, which is the aguas frescas and the elotes, traditional Mexican snacks that they're going to be doing out of a brick and mortar. They've got sort of a Rams elote that they do on Rams game days and can tie in, but also concerts too. We've had some apparel operators come in that are going to do custom merch when there's a big concert here. That you can only get at the Hollywood Park location. And so tying into that, regional or kind of drop-based retail is sort of an important piece that can, let the events dictate how you operate your business, or let them help dictate how you operate your business. And go from there.
Terrific. Well, I know we were on a short time frame today, and I was I've been trying to get a feel for this beyond what I saw at the games, and you've done a great job of laying this out. I really appreciate your perspective and all. If people want to find some information on not only SoFi Stadium, but what the Hollywood Park management is doing, and what the Wilson Meany team is doing, where can I point them?
Yeah, HollywoodParkLife.com is definitely the best place to get all the vertical information. So office, residential, and retail is all kind of located in one place, and you can get connected to the SoFi Stadium website or YouTube Theater websites from there as well.
Terrific. Well, Aaron, thanks for being on The Real Market. I really appreciate it. This is a great conversation.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me.
And please don't forget to follow us. We'd really appreciate it if you subscribe to the podcast. You can do that on Apple iTunes or any of the other podcasting services. It's The Real Market with Chris Rising. And follow us on Twitter at Chris Rising or at RisingRP. And please follow our blog, chrisrising.com or risingrp.com. Thanks so much.
This episode of The Real Market is brought to you by Rising Investor Platform. The platform provides accredited investors with exclusive real estate investment opportunities on a deal-by-deal basis across various asset classes, including office, industrial, hospitality, multifamily, and data. The platform also provides an inside look at deals in our pipeline while giving investors the chance to indicate interest before it's too late. We recently funded our acquisition of 9320 Telstar, a mixed-use office industrial property in El Monte, California, using our investor platform. To learn more about how accredited investors can join the Rising Investor Platform, please visit risinginvestorplatform.com.